In this episode, I'm going to share with you what I learned is the real cause of all of the problems in our life, what underpins everything else, and what we can do to fix those things in order to solve everything from the root instead of trying to fix the symptoms like everybody else wants us to do. So let me run through this as quickly as I can in a summary. The book I wrote on all of this, I often have to say to people, was 650 pages long. That's how much stuff was in it, and it could have probably been twice as long. And I wrote it 2 or 3 years ago now, and I've learned so much more since then. So this is an overarching summary of what I've discovered that works in my life, works in the lives of everyone I've coached, and people who've read the book and done my courses. Seems to work for them as well. Hopefully it will work for you. As you'll know if you've been watching my stuff or listening to my stuff, my big thing is you need to figure out what works for you. If this isn't it, go and find stuff that does. There are different ways of approaching problems in life. The whole point of this work is to address our ego. So I don't need you to copy this identically. It's just something else to think about. But fundamentally, this all takes us back to our childhood. So when we're born, when we come bouncing into this world, we come out as this pure version of a human. We are absolutely good enough as we are. There is nothing wrong with us. But from the very start, we are taught by the big, bad, ugly people around us to start suppressing parts of our systems, parts of who we are. Think about it when a child is born. This is nobody's fault, by the way. This is just stuff that's been passed down through the generations. When people hear a baby crying, what is the first thing most people will say to a baby that cries? Don't cry. Well, guess what? And this might be a shock to you if you've raised children. You may have young children now and you're saying it to them. You've said it to them today. You've said it to them this week. I see it in my family still all the time. And now I've learned this stuff. I'm like, oh, we're just starting the cycle again. When we tell a baby not to cry, we are telling the baby fundamentally to suppress a part of who it is. The baby is crying because it's expressing its emotion. When we tell a baby not to cry, or we don't let a baby cry, we're telling it that part of itself is not good enough. I know that sounds deep, but that's what's going on. What's going on inside a baby when we're born, a human baby, is we know instinctively that we are completely reliant on these big, ugly humans around us. We need them to love us. We need them to keep us alive. It is literally a survival mechanism inside us that makes us adapt. So when we hear these humans telling us that certain things are not acceptable, we change. We change internally in order to survive. This is a survival mechanism. It is brilliant and it is clever and it works for when we're kids. But we're going to talk about why there's problems with it in a few minutes. So that's what happens. We start getting told, don't cry, don't be afraid, don't be angry. And we start to suppress these parts of ourselves. We start to experience things in childhood that we experience as trauma. And those traumas also force us to adapt and to change our inner systems. There's a big topic around trauma that we'll talk about separately, and I've talked about in other places. When I talk about trauma, most people jump to big things: sexual abuse, being raised by drug addicts, being raised by alcoholics, being physically abused. They are all what is described commonly as capital T trauma. The problem is that most of us as children you may have experienced capital T trauma. I know many people who did, many people I've worked with who did. And at the same time, most of us, in fact all of us, experience what is known as small T trauma, which are, if you think of trauma as from 0 to 10 on a scale, I love talking about scales. It helps us to break out of black and white thinking, which is a pandemic on the face of the earth. We should think in scales. Anything from 8 to 10, 8, 9, 10, I'd say is capital T trauma. Everything from 1 to 7 is probably small T trauma. The problem is none of us have been taught to think about small T trauma. Trauma to a child is very different to trauma to an adult. A child can be traumatized by the smallest thing because it's not about the thing itself, it's about how the child internalized it. And we've all been raised in ways that meant we didn't know how to deal with our own emotions internally. As we've already mentioned, we've been taught more than anything to suppress those emotions, which leads to more trauma and more issues that we're carrying with us. It's a very short summary of it. What that trauma and what that suppression, emotional suppression and emotional repression does is it forces us to change who we are internally. So we start to adapt, we start to create different parts of our own persona, we start to create different characters, different personalities, we start to bury parts of ourselves, which ties into shadow work that I talk about in different places, ties into multiple personality work that I talk about in different places. We start to create stories around who we are and what is and isn't acceptable, and that all becomes ingrained in our personalities. In scientific terms, it becomes embedded in our neural pathways in our brain, and that becomes our reality. And that's where most people stay. So that personality that is formed, that has been created by all of this childhood stuff, we bring that into being an adult. And then, again, this is a very short summary, but I'll do my best to make it make sense. All of the wounds we bring with us from childhood, and all of the personality traits and changes that we bring with us from childhood, when we bring them into our adult world, our subconscious feels safe in that setting. So in who we are and the shit we dealt with and the shit we learned from when we were kids. So then what we do subconsciously without realizing it is we recreate in our adult lives the shit we experienced as children so that our subconscious feels safe. Now this is so counterintuitive and can be hard to grasp at first because it doesn't make sense logically. Logically, we think we all want to live nice, happy, joyful lives with loads of money and loads of love. And that's true at a conscious level. But that's not where most of our subconsciouses were developed. So to our subconscious, it feels dangerous to be in those places. To give you a very easy example of this is money. One of the reasons most people who weren't raised with money can never make money and never make money stick. It's one of the reasons people who win the lottery, a large percentage of people who win the lottery end up poor again. Why? It's because our subconscious, if we've been trained to be poor, our subconscious feels safe being poor. That's not meant to happen. So no matter what we do, unless we change our subconscious, unless we retrain our subconscious, it's going to constantly bring us back to where it feels safe. And that's why, going back to the last episodes, the personal development world and the self-help world don't work, because they're trying to force our conscious mind to override our subconscious without dealing with the subconscious. And the subconscious is so powerful, it's going to constantly pull us back, because that's where we've spent the first formative years of our life, the first decades of our life, feeling safe and feeling secure. So we're always going to be pulled back there. You may have experienced this as well in relationships. So you feel like no matter what you do, especially in your romantic relationships, you always end up in the same place. You always end up in a relationship you're not fully satisfied with or in. If this doesn't happen in your life, you are likely to know somebody else this happens to. They leave one shitty relationship, they get into another one, it's just the same. They leave that one, they get into another one, it's just the same. It's because this is happening. Someone had this conversation with me once, and they said about their friend, they were in this shitty relationship, and they said, I've told her she's not going to get what she needs from this relationship. And I said to them, I couldn't disagree more. They are getting exactly what they need from this relationship. They're just getting it on a subconscious level. So what they need, they're getting in unhealthy ways. There's loads to this that we haven't got time to get into in this episode. But that's what's happening. So all of the emotional suppression, emotional repression, and adaptations from childhood, we carry through with us into our adult life, and we recreate it subconsciously. This is what's behind all of our problems. It leads to pain, it leads to anger issues, it leads to anxiety, relationship problems, money problems, health issues. It leads to problems with the relationships with your kids, no matter what age they are, problems with your parents, problems in your job and your career, and it generally leads to a place where everybody's dissatisfied with life. We get to a certain point. This is where the term midlife crisis comes from, because we get to a point in our lives where we think there must be more to life than this. What is going on? Because we've done everything that the world told us we were meant to do to be happy, and we're still not happy. And it's because of this stuff that's going on underneath in our subconscious. So then the big question is, the $64 million question is, how do we get out? And that's the work I did. Basically, I put together stuff from all different places. I was thinking about this even before filming this. It's like mixed martial arts. Like, it's taking skills and ways of doing things from all different places all around the world, all different types of therapies, and it puts them together to form like a super therapy, a super coaching idea system that deals with everything at once and solves everything from its root instead of dealing with the symptoms. So it puts together things like multiple personality work, shadow work. It deals with the stories we've told ourselves. We deal with emotional work, psychological work, and then importantly in this stuff, we do things practically. Practical things in our real life that has an impact in our lives now. Something I've heard from loads of people who've worked with therapists before coming to work with me is that therapy helped them talk about emotional stuff and psychological stuff, but they would leave, and at first it was great because they got stuff off their chest, but after a while they would leave thinking, but my life's not changing. I'm not doing things practically in my life that are helping me change. That's what I started to develop in this work. Okay, how can I take this stuff and apply it to my life practically, because that's the way my brain works, and use it to do things practically in life that will help me change. And that's what we do in this work. We deal with it all together, the psychological, the emotional, and the real life stuff. And by doing that, we strip away all this old stuff, and then we rebuild who we want to be. Going back to episodes from a few episodes ago, when we figured out who we want to turn into. This work is about stripping away the problems from the first episode in this mini-series, rebuilding ourselves to turn us into who we want to be, and fundamentally what's at the bottom of that is learning how to feel our emotions fully. This is, as I've sort of developed this over time and whole work, and I like to bring things down to their most simple terms. What's the most simple way we can look at this? Fundamentally at the bottom of all of this, and it sounds crazy, is just feeling our emotions fully for what they are and allowing ourselves to be who we're really meant to be without feeling shame, without feeling like it's not good enough, because that's what builds our self-esteem. Underneath all of this is low self-esteem, a feeling that we are not good enough fundamentally, because we've been taught subconsciously since we were kids that we're not good enough. Generally speaking, it's not anyone's fault. They just pass this down through the generations. We have been passing it down until we learn this. We have been passing it down. You are likely to have passed this down to your kids if you've got them, or to younger people if you don't have your own kids, to other people's. When you've learned this stuff, you start to see it, and you start seeing it in real life, and you're like, oh fuck, this is what's going on all the time. The best thing I can say to you, if you've got kids, don't beat yourself up. This has just been passed down through the generations. The greatest gift you could give your children is to do this work on yourself. Whenever I read things about people trying to change their parenting styles, trying in a modern way, trying to help kids feel their emotions, it's all great and it's well intentioned, but the problem is, if you haven't figured out this shit in your own life, the chances of you being able to teach somebody else to do something that you can't do are very slim, especially with kids. We all learn as children by copying the adults around us, not from what they say, but from what they do. So the greatest gift you could give your children, if you have them, and this applies no matter how old they are. My mum is 78 years old now. The greatest gift she could give me still is to do this work, because then I could connect with her in a way I am not able to connect with her now. And in a very sad way, my dad passed away last year. We never had an emotional connection because he wasn't able to do this. His emotional suppression was so powerful, he was shut down. As I say that, it is likely to resonate with you about someone in your life, but remember that whoever programmed us, because this is what it's all about, programming, subconscious programming, like computers. We're programmed like computers when we were little kids. Whoever programmed us, we've passed on that programming because it's in us now. We can't just say, I hear people say this all the time, well, I'd never be like my parents, so I'm not going to do to my kids what they did to me. It's bullshit. Because unless we've done work to change who we are, subconsciously we are passing it on. We might not pass on certain things consciously, but subconsciously we are passing it on. So the greatest gift you can give your kids, if you've got them, as a bit of a side point, is to do this work. And sadly, for all of us who are, if you're similar age to me, or even if you're in your 20s watching this, we have had this programmed into us for decades. so it takes time to undo. The beauty for children is the straight path to being an emotionally mature, secure human who we're meant to be. That is a straight line from childhood. If a child is taught how to just feel their emotions and that they are good enough just as they are, that is the straight line path we were all meant to go on. But instead, we've all, for those of us who want to do the work, we've got to do this big loop all the way through this journey that I've just talked you through. So that's it in a nutshell. We are going to go into this in more detail as episodes progress. We're going to, all the content, all the free content we're going to send your way is going to cover all of this stuff. So stick with the episodes, follow it through, and you will slowly over time learn all the stuff you need to learn. If you like this episode and you watch on YouTube, please click the like button. To go to the next phase, the next part of this mini series is all about the excuses that we all have. They're called limiting beliefs in the personal development world, but we would all generally refer to them as excuses. The things that stop us from making the changes we say we want to make. To hear about the most common ones I see in my day-to-day life, the stuff that I've had to overcome, click here. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're on the podcast, go to the next episode. Thank you for joining me as always. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Wherever you are, I'll see you on the next show.